That's a grizzly, and that's me. But the journey to photograph this apex predator wasn't such an easy one. When I traveled to Yellowstone, I was not prepared for the incredible week ahead. This is the journey of struggle and triumph to photograph Yellowstone wildlife and North America's most dangerous predator. Now then, let's start at the beginning. After arriving and setting up camp, we went to bed and got up early at the crack of dawn the next morning to venture out to Lamar Valley. We started our first morning out with a pair of bison making their way up the road. Evan and I started getting some shots, but as soon as I saw those mountain peaks in the background, I knew that my goal for the day was to capture a shot displaying a mountain peak behind one. We stayed ahead of their path and let them walk towards us, getting some cool moments with these massive meatheads walking close by. Still, not quite the shot I was looking for, but headed in the right direction. We headed back to the cars, drove our way through a bison herd, and found a stunning pond of water to photograph at. Immediately when I saw it, I knew that the first shot that I wanted was of a bison reflection beside the still water. As a bison passed close by, I got a shot that wound up being one of my top 10 from this trip, as you get a beautiful scene around the bison reflected in the tranquil water. I'd love to know what you think about it in the comments, and what your favorites are from this journey as we progress through the video. While we were there, a pronghorn strutted by to say hello. I didn't get anything I particularly liked of it, as I struggled with the more simple scenery and the color of its body, but it was a cool sighting nonetheless. Behind us and up on the hill, there was a group of bighorn sheep hiking up the mountain, but no good shots of these guys either. Out in the distance, some unbelievably cute bison babies were found running around. They pranced around and followed their parents closely, playing tag with the other kids and feeding on the grasses modeled by their parents. Hopefully, the young bison won't be modeling this behavior anytime soon though. Bison were everywhere, and this was just but a fraction of the bison in the Yellowstone area. It's amazing to see how they've come back from just a few hundred left in the late 1800s to now many hundreds of thousands once again.
So if you see the lone calf right here, I'm pretty certain that he's lost his mom. Just based on how he's acting and how he's kind of just standing there off to the side alone and not really doing much.
Evan had shifted my attention out to a lone calf nearby us and just across the pond. The poor little guy had probably gotten lost and was now out on his own with no one to look after him. In hopes of surviving, he follows the herd and hopes to be reunited with his mother once again. But there are no guarantees for him out in the Yellowstone wilderness, and there are predators on the loose. Down the road, Evan and I found this beautiful field with some stunning mountain backdrops at the end of Lamar Valley. There were some bison roaming out in the distance, but unfortunately, they were moving away from us and too far out to get good shots. A little ways up the valley, and a few hours later, we spotted our first grizzly. I parked as fast as I could, and I made my way out into a decent position. He was far off, over a quarter mile out, but Evan and I hoped to predict the direction in which he was heading. What made it even trickier to get footage was his head dug under the bushes as he dug through the ground way out in the distance. But hopefully he would make his way over to us. As this happened, a pair of coyotes sprung up out of nowhere. While the grizzly wasn't anywhere nearby, these coyotes were, so I followed them for a bit and got to watch them walking along the river line. They were either hunting or scavenging for something to eat, and as they got within a reasonable distance, I wound up taking an image that I decently liked, framing him in the top corner. Back to the grizzly, he was making his way in the direction that we were, but then as soon as I was getting my hopes up, he turned around and left. Way too far out for a good image, I had missed my shot with the grizzly bear that I was hoping for. But luckily, it wouldn't be my last encounter of the trip. By this time, it was already getting late, and so Evan and I wound up splitting up and heading back to different sections of the park. As we were driving, there happened to be a herd of bison coming right up the road in a few groups. One walked right by us, but there was another that was running along the side of the road, separated by a ridge. I quickly scrambled out of the car and got a shot off that was wider and environmental, but the scenery wasn't too nice to make it anything amazing. In a closer encounter with the bison up the road, I was able to grab a close-up of a bison calf and its parents close by, along with a few bison napping. It's incredible how huge these guys are in person so close up. As the evening approached, I walked out into the wilderness and noticed a sandhill crane out in the distance. This is a new treat for me, as where we have them in California, they stick to open marshlands that are far from as scenic as these settings. I decided to take my chances with this guy and tried to get some wider scenic shots while he was far off. Nothing was quite panning out how I had wanted though, so I decided to make my way over to a pond nearby in hopes that he would continue walking in the direction he was headed. Sure enough, less than half an hour later, the sandhill crane approached, and I wound up getting another encounter with him. I noticed during this time that he was continuing to call to his mate a mile or more away. These calls were shared back and forth, and as he walked around foraging, I got opportunities to take some of my favorite images I have ever captured of a sandhill crane in a dark and moody forest scene. And these would be another 2 from my top 10 shots of this adventure. After spending some time with me, he was called back home to his mate and took off flying far into the distance, not to be seen again. The next morning, Evan and I made our way up to Hayden Valley, a whole different landscape, still covered in a decent amount of snow during the month of May. At sunrise, we stopped by to get some stunning cloud color in the sky across a pond, but really, nothing much happened here. I split off from Evan for a bit when I heard about a family of harlequin ducks in Hayden Valley. I've always wanted to capture the striking colors and pattern of a male, but have never had the opportunity to do so. They were out off the side of a boardwalk, but I had to be careful as I made my way as eye level as possible with the water because of the snow overhanging the river. Eventually, I got settled and waited for the harlequins to come close by. Unbelievably, they made their way over to a rock that was 20 or so feet away from me, and I wound up getting another top 10 shots of the trip, with this image here of a lone bokeh ball reflected in the water opposite the curled up harlequin. Loving the results of this image, I started to work with some slow exposure techniques to try and nail a completely different and creative image of the bird. Close up and zoomed in at 600 millimeters, this became really difficult as the birds move way more than you'd expect when standing there. To get a correct motion blur in the water that I liked, I was down to half a second exposure on a 3-second timer, repeating the shot over 100 times. While some of these were fun and showed off the motion of the preening, when a pair of ducks moved out onto a distant rock was when I really got the image that I liked. With this image, I captured the whole rapids scene flowing by me and the pair of harlequins, male and female, off in the distance, making another top 10 photograph of the trip. Now that my leg was frozen numb from being submerged in the snow the whole time, I made my way back to meet up with Evan, who had just finished filming a trio of grizzlies that had taken off. I couldn't believe that I had missed an opportunity to photograph grizzlies once again, but we decided to trek on down to the geothermal area of the park. That is, until we got stopped by a bison herd blocking the middle of the road. We hopped out quickly and got some shots here of the bison roaming by, and the cloud cover sweeping the land. Watching the massive bison in the grasslands of Yellowstone feels like the Serengeti of America, as Evan says, and I couldn't agree more. Make sure to check out Evan's channel as well at the end of this video for more great content on the Yellowstone area. The day was getting late, but since we were in Yellowstone, I couldn't help but visit the Grand Prismatic Spring, a landscape photographer's paradise with all of the colors painted into the hot springs, and the cloud displays were amazing this afternoon. During our final night here, we decided to whip out the telescope to take a look at some celestial objects in the night sky. It made for a surreal sort of way to end our last night camping in the nation's oldest national park, and brought me back to what it must have felt like to look up at the wild sky all those years ago. On our final morning, I took Evan out to the same place I had seen the sandhill crane the other day in hopes of seeing one return. The scenery was stunning here for photographs, but unfortunately, none returned or were heard. We did get to spend the morning with some green-winged teal and mallards, and we got some close-up encounters with the mallards in the reflection of the water. It was a peaceful and serene morning sitting by the pondside, and little did I know that later on that day, I would have one of the most exciting wildlife photography moments of my career. Off to the Grand Tetons. What an amazing mountain range. I stopped by at the Snake River overlook to snap photos of this majestic range that Ansel Adams photographed years ago. And while I was at it, I watched a common raven calling from the top of a snag with the Teton Peaks behind it. This gave me an idea. If I was able to find a grizzly during my time here, I really wanted to capture it in a wider landscape shot with the Grand Tetons towering in the background. What a shot that could be. A while later, I got distracted by a black-billed magpie a little ways down the road. These birds are common here, but I don't get any of them in my area, and I've always thought that they were gorgeous. So I spent a half hour with them getting shots, flying around, and even at one point, approaching me close up for an intense portrait shot. Surprisingly easy, this wound up being one of my top 10 photos from the adventure as well, and I was glad I stopped by for these easy pickings. One more stop at another overlook, and man did these Grand Tetons look amazing. So I headed over to meet up with Evan, who is scouting out some locations for grizzlies. This week is the week in which the season warms up just enough and all of the grizzlies begin to make their way out of the den. Evan and I met up to discuss plans, then headed over to a place that he had heard of a grizzly being spotted. Not just any grizzly, but Grizzly 399, which is the most famous mother bear in the area. We waited around for hours, and the only thing that wound up coming through was a coyote. This provided for a cool encounter as he literally ran right by me, but it still wasn't the same as a grizzly that I had traveled 1,000 miles to come find. So, on a side note, today was my 27th birthday. The bear was not coming out, and there was little guarantee of it happening. So I headed out to enjoy a birthday dinner, while Evan stayed behind to wait for the bear. And as I would soon come to find, Grizzly 399, in her 27th year of life, would step right out of the meadow in front of Evan to become the oldest grizzly mom on record to come out with cubs. I could not believe I missed my opportunity. Evan's patience had paid off as he had pulled off some incredible photographs of this historic moment that I had missed out on. Determined to make something of this trip, I headed over to a location in which a different grizzly bear named Bonita had been spotted in the open. As I arrived, there were swarms of people held back by the rangers to keep them at a safe distance. Getting a shot through the crowd was difficult, and I had never experienced such chaos between wildlife photographers before in my life. But I would soon be in luck as a thunderstorm started to roll in, and the heavy rain cleared literally everyone from the surrounding area. I guess I was the only one crazy enough to stick around. And finally, all that was left was me, the bear, the ranger, and the earth as I sat through the elements waiting for my moment. I had traveled too far and too long not to capture this image, and as the massive grizzly turned in my direction, I fired off multiple shots to show off this stormy scene that I had finally captured my first grizzly bear photograph in. These images were top 10, but as the grizzly left, I knew that these weren't the perfect shots I was looking for yet. In the coming hours, I would get one more opportunity to capture the image that I had dreamed of, with the Grand Tetons placed behind this powerful predator, and a closer encounter seeing the raw power of this massive bear. But that's for our journey tomorrow. We hopped out of the car on this frosty morning and immediately saw a deer grazing. We were hoping to get it against the stunning Grand Teton peaks, but the hill behind it was too tall for a good shot.
Now let's try to get something in this beautiful light.
I know. Man, imagine a moose in that mist. We found footprints, but as the sun came up, only geese and sandpipers were to be found. Throughout the past 4 days, I had adventured through Yellowstone and captured some amazing moments in nature. I got to witness its sounds, whatever that is, and rare creatures beside amazing scenery. My goal was to photograph a grizzly during my trip here, and through waiting out a thunderstorm, I was finally able to do so. But my photographs weren't exactly what I wanted yet. I wanted a better close-up image of a grizzly, and an image of a grizzly with those iconic Tetons in the background. So here I am, searching for some more wildlife to photograph. We ran into a pair of bluebirds. These birds are stunning to photograph with their sky blue colors, and against the orange sunrise lighting up the brush, there were some interesting angles on them in the willow forest.
Just keep going and trying to find whatever else.
Okay, yeah, that's fine with me.
Making our way across the stream, we soon ran into an American robin tending to its nest in a tree. While we couldn't get any angles on the nest dug into the tree, we did get to see it making its way around for some grub to feed its young ones. While watching its patterns, I noticed it going down towards a little stream outlet to drink from the river. While I went there to photograph it, I got distracted by a tinier and much cuter black-capped chickadee fluttering around for a snack, and wound up capturing an isolated scenic photo of it I decently liked. I wasn't done with the robin yet, though, and after re-engaging with it just a little ways over the mound, it landed on a clump of dead branches that made for an interesting compositional element for it to perch on. While I wish I could have color isolated this scene better, the composition was still worthwhile for a photograph. We continued to hike around more and admired the Grand Teton views in the distance through the trees. We ran into a few more birds, including a killdeer and even a herd of elk way out in the distance, but no scenes good enough to photograph. In a fun shot here, you can actually see birds on the back of the elk trying to hang on. It wouldn't be until later this evening that the real moment I had been waiting for would come. On our way back, we ran into a yellow warbler, which, for me, is a treat to see. I worked at trying to capture this guy amongst the thick brush and bushes, and to my surprise, I captured a photograph I liked quite a bit. I also got a high-key image against the sky that turned out decent, showing off its bright yellow color. As the light got bad, Evan and I decided to walk back to the cars to start our search for grizzlies once again when we stumbled across a pile of bones.
Look at this. It looks like elk to me.
It looks kind of like cleared out, as if maybe was it resting in there, do you think? Or
It could be, yeah. This could be like an area where an elk or moose bedded down. We're not at the top of the food chain out here.
yeah.
And so the journey begins once again. This wasn't the first time I had gotten up my hopes for a grizzly, nor would it be my last. Evan had heard of some grizzly siblings just a few years old hanging out just outside a town border, so we headed over to check them out. Unfortunately, the situation was being managed along a highway road in which we couldn't get any closer than a parking lot where our cars were parked. It was fun to watch them wrestle and play around for a bit, but ultimately, no photographs would come of our time with them since the ranger was keeping them at bay. And since Evan and I knew that we wouldn't get good photos, we decided to move back into position where Grizzly 399 and Bonita had been spotted on our previous day. And we predicted right. Out from the tree line, Bonita came stumbling out into the clearing. At this time, the weather was perfect. The storm had brought in a soft and moody light, but not so dark that it dampened the whole image. Through the chaos of the people, we scrambled into place and set up our tripods just in time to grab some amazing photographs of this powerful bear. She stayed a distance away and hugged the tree line, bringing her further away from the security of the vehicles as the hour progressed. As she dug for gophers out in the field, the photographs were becoming less stunning once again, and Evan, desiring to get even better shots of his historic Grizzly 399 encounter from our last adventure, decided to pursue a plan to photograph her. We split up, me staying here and hoping to predict Bonita's path if she crosses the road, and Evan heading a little down the highway to try and find Grizzly 399 so that if either came into good view, we would know about it. The storm continued to approach, and I stood around waiting in anticipation. After waiting for an hour, Bonita initiated her approach towards the road, and I knew that the crossing was about to happen. I texted Evan and immediately started planning my composition of her in front of the Tetons based on her route. She walked closer and closer, and nothing was going to stop her now. I just had to be in the right place at the right time to get the shot that I wanted. Because of my willingness to stay in my last encounter with her, I got photographs that no one else was willing to get in that scene on that stormy day. And due to sticking around here, I would be the only one in the area photographing her right before the time of her crossing. Evan had arrived, scrambling into place, and just as she started sprinting towards the road, he made it in time to photograph, while I took my chances with a wide angle of the Tetons and Grizzly and pulled off an incredible scenic image of the Tetons towering above Bonita. Not only did I capture a wider scenic image of the grizzly bear with the Grand Tetons, but I also got my fair share of close-up portrait images that I had hoped for of the bear. Everything I had dreamed of getting in my week at Yellowstone had finally come to fruition. All of that hard work, a few days of disappointment, and no grizzly photos ultimately came down to this moment where it all came together on my final night in Wyoming. What a sunset that was to be out in nature, and what an incredible week in Yellowstone, searching to photograph a grizzly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, I'd be honored if you subscribed. And if you want to see me explore America's birdwatching village, check out this video here in the end screen.